Hey guys, so this is definitely a topic I've touched on, but not something I've taken the time to make a whole video about. The idea of the Christian persecution complex is one that's been talked about pretty extensively, but in this video I want to specifically go over its origins as well as modern ways that it manifests. Aside from that, I want to give two disclaimers. One, I am aware that not all Christians feel or act this way, nor do I mean to insinuate as such. If you don't do the things discussed in this video, it's not about you. Second, I'm aware that there are places in the world where Christians are genuinely oppressed, but that is not the subject of this video, nor is it something that people with this mindset generally bring up themselves. This video is about Protestant Christianity in the West, and more specifically conservative evangelical communities in the United States. With that out of the way, let's just get into the video. When most people hear the word Christian persecution complex, they think of something along the lines of the God's Not Dead movies, the TikTok trend with people doing skits of being jailed for their beliefs, or even Jehovah's Witnesses. I will be touching on some of those things later in the video, but I think it's important to understand how and when these ideas really became popular, from the Red Scare to the moral majority. The earliest spread of these beliefs can easily be attributed to the Cold War. It's responsible for God being on our money and in our pledge. The Cold War created a lot of religious fanaticism and outward expression of such, something done to separate and oppose the ideas of the godless communists in the Soviet Union. Christianity, as a majority religion, was seen as a unifying factor between Americans that differentiated us from them. The term Cold War was used due to the fact that there was no actual violence committed by the USSR or the United States against one another, though proxy wars and technological races such as the space race were obviously a thing. I note this because while religious folks in the Soviet Union absolutely did face religious discrimination, this did not extend to, nor was it forced into, American culture or government. American Christians were not only not persecuted here, but were propped up as a moral divider between us and the USSR. The Cold War was absolutely painted as a religious war of sorts, and propaganda from both sides reflect this. The Red Scare is still responsible for many of the anti-communist and anti-socialist sentiments that remain common in the United States today. Despite the reality of the situation, that American Christians were not facing any form of persecution, the fear and religious fanaticism it created became responsible for the oppression of both US and foreign communist socialists and atheists, both during the time of the Cold War and persisting into modern times. To this day, the American education system tends to omit socialist and left-wing views of notable historical figures, warping history to present them as more quote-unquote American, i.e. capitalist and Christian. The most notable figures on that list are Martin Luther King Jr., Albert Einstein, George Orwell, and Nelson Mandela, all except George Orwell having been persecuted by us during their time on this earth. It's worth noting that all the events I'm speaking about in this section of the video overlap in time frame, with the Cold War being between 1947 and 1991, ending after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the Civil Rights Movement taking place between 54 and 68, and the moral majority being founded in 1979. While the religious oppression fantasy and anti-communist sentiments from the Cold War were predicated on the idea that a collective belief in the Christian God differentiated us from the Soviets, beliefs held about the Christian persecution complex tied to the Civil Rights Movement had much more direct roots in discrimination of other Americans. The founders of the moral majority had long been failing yet attempting to sway American Protestants to the more modern beliefs we now associate them with, such as anti-abortion and anti-pornography sentiments, as well as a push for Christianity and prayer in schools. This had been largely ineffective. Many Protestant churches at the time, even including Southern Baptists, were fairly liberal on topics such as abortion and viewed it as a quote-unquote Catholic issue and therefore outside of their concern. While this effort had been unsuccessful for some time, the Christian school Bob Jones University being forced to remove racist segregation policies was the tipping point that allowed Jerry Falwell and his buddies Francis Schaeffer and Paul Weyrich to squeeze their way into Christian spaces. This was done by harnessing the racism in white Protestant communities to paint them as the oppressed ones, that the government was no longer content to just leave them alone and they were under attack. Mind you, the attack in question was stripping tax exemption from Bob Jones University after it refused to comply with anti-segregation laws, the school having had a ban on both black students and interracial relationships. The school's way of supposedly reconciling this was to admit a single black student who would leave the school within a month, and it maintained its ban on interracial relationships. The leaders of the moral majority, and most notably Schaeffer, would present this among the more modern issues as secularism poisoning the country, and presenting the changing social landscapes as a moral and spiritual downfall of the nation. The presentation of these beliefs, that enforcing a Christian university desegregate was an attack on their freedom of religion, has largely been wiped from modern history. Even many atheists believe the moral majority got its roots in opposition to Roe v. Wade, and not in fighting to uphold racist laws and practices. Evangelicals were taught to believe that they were victims, and that the black young adults and teens seeking an education and the government attempting to give them a fair shot were out to get them. That anything an evangelical or evangelical organization did being questioned, criticized, or changed was not just a personal attack, but a larger moral corruption. This sentiment that the lack of belief in God, or more so their specific God, as well as criticism or condemnment of actions taken by that religion is persecution, can be felt extremely strongly in the modern United States as well. This extends to Christian media, discussions around both K-12 and higher education, casual conversations and remarks, and most notably at the moment, the conservative political sphere. Movies like God's Not Dead are essentially persecution porn for Christians, presenting a variety of scenarios that literally do not happen but feed the existing complex of the community they're made for. If you're unfamiliar with the movies, I won't be summarizing all of them, as there's fucking 5 of them now, and I've thankfully only seen the first 3. However, the original movie's premise is that a Christian student is made to proclaim God is dead by an atheist professor. All the students play along, but he refuses to. All of the movies are legal dramas where the Christian is under attack by some wider institution, almost always being the education system, and the Christian is tasked with defending their faith to the government. This attempt is presented as an uphill battle, where the Christian in question is opposed and fought by every individual and system around them aside from other Christians. Outside of more professional media, if you can really call it that, content surrounding this idea has become extremely popular on social media as well. The TikTok trend of Christians green screening themselves into a jail cell with text along the lines of, "Me when they make the Bible illegal," or "When the government makes you deny God," presenting the idea of jail time for refusing to denounce their faith as a legitimate and looming threat. Other TikTok trends have arisen as well, with people repeatedly demeaning and attacking lesbian singer-songwriter Gigi Perez for the inclusion of the line, "I don't believe in God, but I believe that you're my savior," in her song Sailor Song, expressing they felt the lyric was disrespectful and, quote, "didn't need to be included." This trend often relied on what my subscribers will know is my absolute least fucking favorite phrase on the planet, "just respect my religion," and was further expanded into people changing the lyrics or recording themselves skipping the line, often with text continuing to denounce it. This idea that expressing disagreement with Christianity is in itself disrespectful, even when done casually or through art, is discriminatory is not, however, exclusive to TikTok trends. This is an attitude I've personally experienced, both just through living in Texas and when visiting my dad's side of the family in Missouri. I've known people who literally have made up a church they go to because not only is "what church are you at?" seen as a normal introductory statement, but saying you don't is a guarantee of conflict. I had a friend in high school who told me having atheist in my bio was quote-unquote flaunting my hatred for God and I should remove it. And for context, this was only in my bio in the first place because I wanted people to stop trying to talk about their religion to me. I've also received plenty of comments on this channel in my TikTok, especially on less serious things such as shorts or community posts, that I shouldn't share or talk about my lack of religion because doing so is inherently disrespectful. This is usually framed as a "why can't you just respect people's beliefs," even when the context is a joke or just a statement about my own personal lack of religion, not even a criticism of it. Obviously, however, this extends outside my personal experience of "if you openly disagree with me, you're persecuting me" comments. The entire idea of the war on Christmas is built off of the idea that accommodating other faiths or secular content or statements are inherently derogatory towards Christianity. The two glaringly obvious examples of this being the red Starbucks cup and the phrase "Happy Holidays," with the former simply removing the secular Christmas imagery, such as snowmen and trees, in favor of a solid color cup, and the latter simply accounting for the fact that not everyone celebrates Christmas. Neither of these things are barring anyone else from participating in Christmas activities, nor striking Dennis Prager with a bullet for responding "Merry Christmas" when he's told "Happy Holidays," but simply attempts to be inclusive, something that obviously includes Christianity as well. While pretty much everything I've discussed from modern times is relatively annoying, I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's a serious issue beyond how it just feeds to the existing propaganda of already indoctrinated people. The God's Not Dead movies are bad, even disregarding their messaging. Just as movies, they're bad. The TikToks range from cringy to stupid, and Dennis Prager is delusional even by the admission of many Christians. But these things are only a symptom of a wider harmful belief system. This content is directly intertwined with the current administration, its supporters, and the legislation it's putting out that has resulted in multiple organizations warning of the signs of genocide in the United States. Almost every discriminatory action currently being taken by the United States has some root in this belief system, whether direct or indirect. Even Trump and Elon's borderline Nazi shit, if you can even really say borderline, regarding immigrants is still built off the idea of moral corruption in the country that fueled the founding of the moral majority, as well as the pretty obvious direct parallels to Nazi Germany. The Trump administration and Project 2025's attack on trans and gay people is much more directly intertwined with these beliefs as well. Again, the idea that falling outside the bounds evangelicals have set is being presented as discrimination against them. Meanwhile, they oppose marginalized groups while crying victim. And they cry victim despite Trump recently preventing access to gender marker changes, with DMVs confiscating identifying documents of many people who attempt to renew their ID or passport, etc., creating an executive order stating trans people essentially don't exist and barring anyone below the age of 19 from accessing gender-affirming care, which includes 18-year-olds, legal adults, reinstating his trans military ban, knowingly forcing trans women into male prisons to be raped, and threats that are uncertain until their eventual arrival to quote-unquote eradicate gender ideology. And yet, the ones perpetuating these ideas view themselves as oppressed, presenting those they aim to abolish as criminal. The arguments against trans folks even existing that will indoctrinate children to be trans and seek them out to convert them is only in existence because by us existing in a way that doesn't fit the mold they've made for us, we threaten the indoctrination that they've spent the last 70 years cultivating. Side note, by the way, because I'm expecting comments about this, I go over specific details and facts and sources involving Trump and Project 2025 in my most recent video before this. I don't care if he denounced it, as every other thing relating the two shows his statements that he's quote-unquote never even read it are blatantly untrue. There's more detail in that video and better sourcing, but the cliff notes are that over half of its authors have worked directly with Trump at some point recently, and Trump himself met in person with the Heritage Foundation's founder and co-owner. This is not a debate, it is easily found and verified information. Outside of Trump's specific actions, we have a host of different groups trying to force Christianity into government. School vouchers are being pushed repeatedly and have been for a long time, which divert funds from public schools often into religious quote-unquote education. Young Earth creationists stating evolutionary theory is an unfounded belief and should either not be taught at all or be taught alongside creationism. Politicians openly citing religion as a factor in abortion bans and trans healthcare bans and discrimination, and even politicians like Marjorie Taylor Greene stating she's a quote-unquote proud Christian nationalist. Despite all of the political and physical violence committed throughout the pretty much whole history of the religious right, the story they tell unequivocally paints them as the oppressed ones. Whether that's people less privileged wanting equal opportunity, or certain groups of people not fitting into the box they've attempted to shove everyone into, including those who have no way to even try and fit inside it. The Christian persecution complex can look like a lot of things, from cringy TikToks, fear-mongering around those outside their sphere, and a long history of oppression of those outside of it, acting as though our very existence is discrimination against them. Ultimately, I hold no ill will towards people who try to choose and keep any marginalized or irreligious identity quiet, and the same goes for those of non-Christian faiths. It's been shown that those people are very much capable of both physical violence as well as essentially destroying people's lives as a result of finding out you don't fit into their mold. However, if you are someone outside of that mold who feels safe or confident enough to do so, I implore you, don't keep quiet. Don't allow them to believe that they're unopposed, that they're correct, to let their ideas go unchallenged. If your very existence is seen as a threat to them, use that to your advantage. That's all I've got today, guys. If you like my content and want to support me, consider subscribing or checking out my Ko-fi in the description. I also have a new, more official Discord server that will be listed in addition to my 18+, less organized, kind of bullshitty server. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check it out. Until next time, ha de.
The children think too much, they've hardly a fear of God, always asking questions they should only wish away.